I want to kind of just dive in what you're doing. So it's not new anymore. I mean, you're pretty settled in India. You have a life there. And what's your life look like? I mean, what are you, what are you involved in? What's the organization? And talk to us about what you guys are up to.
Yeah, so I work with Central India Christian Mission. My mother-in-law and father-in-law started this ministry about almost 40 years ago now. It's been like 38 or 39 years ago that they started the ministry. I'm the only white guy working here with them, so it's it's completely national led. It's all Indians. And they started with just the two of them, basically, with a handful of people. And now, bro, the ministry's expanded to just be unbelievable. The footprint of CICM is touching not only India but several surrounding countries. In the last 38 years, the ministry has started, which I'll go into a little bit of what I'm doing with church planning and multiplication. So without talking about the multiplication side of things, in a traditional, normal church planting, style, basically, our organization has started about 3,300 churches in the last 38 years, which is unbelievable. And on any given Sunday, there's about 600,000 people that meet in a CICM church across the country. And so God has used CICM in massive ways. It started off as more of a church planting organization, but has now expanded. My wife leads a children's home, an orphanage. So she has over 150 kids at the children's home that she started when she was 20. Again, I married way up, bro, way
Yeah.
up.
Wow.
And
When I
so,
was 20, I
um,
didn't know what I was going to do for the weekend. So
exactly. Yeah, you don't want to know what I was doing when I was 20.
yeah.
And so anyway, so she's just unbelievable. We have 5 other children's homes as well in different parts of the country, so 6 total. There's about 1,100 kids in those homes that God has used CICM to save and transform their lives. It's been just incredible. Uh, I lead a church planting school that we train up church planters to go plant more churches and multiply disciples. I also lead a training program called Ignite. That's a part of our organization, which is where we got our investment name from. Was the movement that we're
I like
leading
it.
in India. And so Ignite is, yeah, dude. Ignite is, it's basically the idea of igniting movements of the gospel, igniting disciples who will make disciples, churches that will start churches. And out of all those trainings we've done, man, when we switch from addition to multiplication, so shifting our thinking towards multiplying disciples and churches, in the last 6 years, man, we've seen about 5,500 house churches started in the last 6 years.
Mm.
And so just mind blowing what God has done with that. Just this year alone in 2020, in the midst of COVID, we've seen 1,300 churches started this year so far. It just in the midst of all that. So anyway, there's a lot of other things too, bro. I mean, we've
No,
got like
yeah.
a hospital and a nursing college, and there's a ton of ministry pieces, but that's kind of our main heartbeat.
That's awesome, man. Well, that's amazing what God's doing through you and your and the organization that you're involved with. And I want to touch on this a little bit because so I'm in America, obviously, and I go to a church, and they're one of their missions is church planting, right? And they actually just planted a church here, and what they mean by that is they typically have a church. Maybe it starts off typically at a school, or ours actually is at the YMCA or something like that, right? So they plant this church, and then their goal is eventually to move out of that school or YMCA to get their own building and to grow
Yeah.
their church. And they have a pastor and they have worship music, and that's the typical American church. Now,
Yep.
when you talk about church planning in India, is that what you're talking about, or are you talking about something different?
Yeah, it looks quite a bit different in a few different ways. So, first of all, our leaders in India are literally risking their lives going to new areas. There is the threat of their life in several different parts of India, not everywhere. There are some really incredible open areas in India where they're not as against Christianity or Jesus. But then there's some really difficult areas that are our leaders are risking their lives and risking everything to go start churches. And so one difference is definitely the risk involved in doing something like that in some of the areas of India. The second one is, so these are usually starting in homes. So they're not starting in, buildings per se. They're starting in homes as they go into new areas or new villages. Families that come to Christ then open their home to begin a meeting in that home. And so that's kind of where they begin, and many times they stay there. So they'll stay in that home and then multiply into other homes in the community and into other villages as well. And what we've seen is that when they stay kind of lean and mean, they actually multiply much quicker and easier than a larger building that may be more expensive, right? Because a home doesn't really cost anything. There's very, few expenses involved. You want to plant a church in the US, it usually takes hundreds of thousands of dollars, sometimes millions, depending on if you build a large building or not. And so it takes a lot of money. But in a place like India, where that's not really possible and the resources are not available for a lot of things like that, usually these churches are staying within homes or even outside under a mango tree or something like that, where they're meeting. And so that's definitely a second difference. I would say a third major difference is their focus on discipleship and obedience to Jesus. And so we really train our churches and disciples to be true followers of Christ, right? People who are actually doing what Jesus has called them to do and being who Jesus has called them to be. Not saying that churches in America don't do that, because we all long for that. But sometimes in the Western culture, we get disciples out of our churches in spite of what we're doing, not because of what we're doing sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
And what I see a lot of the Indian churches doing, they're getting disciples multiplying and true followers of Christ because of the way they're doing it, not in spite of what they're doing. And so they're not accidentally making disciples. They're very purposefully making disciples that are multiplying. They're simple, they're easy to manage, they're reproducible, so they can continue to multiply easily, and they're multiplying disciples in churches like crazy by having them, simple and reproducible like that, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I love that. So typically, like a house church, you're probably not talking about. So typically, here a church plant that you might have to have 50 people at least to start a church, something like that. I don't know, but you're probably talking about what, 10 people to 5? I don't
Yeah,
know.
I mean it'll be like 10 to 20 usually, something like that
Yeah.
at the beginning. And the thing about, planning a church in America, man, a lot of times is you'll take 50 Christians from a bigger church and plant them in a little or a smaller area to kind of launch the church.
Mm-hmm.
And here in areas where there are no Christians, that's impossible. So you've got to start with nothing. So you've got a couple people going into a brand new area where there's no Christians at all, no one who's ever heard of Jesus. I mean, imagine that, man. Like, our guys go into areas that they'll say, "Hey, have you ever heard of Jesus?" And the common answer is like, "Hey, you might want to go up the road to another village. There might be a guy named Jesus there. We don't have anybody here by that name."
Right.
Like, they have no idea who you're talking about. I mean, my father-in-law always says, we live in a world that more people have tasted Coca-Cola than have heard about Jesus, right?
Yeah.
More
Right.
people know, Donald Trump or have tasted Pepsi than have heard the name of Jesus. And so it's an area that's in desperate need of the gospel. And so they're starting from ground zero, more like the book of Acts than, more of a traditional Western setting.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
I just want to dig in, this is obviously so it could be a controversial topic. I know that I go to a church here in America, and we have about 2,000 people that go to the church. There's a couple of different services. Anyways, COVID had hit, and they didn't have the kids service, right? So I had to take my son to the family center, So this is where like the families go, where kids don't have to be super quiet. They can run around, stuff like that. Anyways, so it was on a Sunday morning and we're in the family center and it's a pretty big area. And I look around and we're the only ones in this family center. And I look around just how big it was and all the lights and everything going on. And I was like, this costs millions of dollars to run this thing, you know? And I guess I never really realized that. Thank you so much for checking out the Brett Snodgrass channel. If you like this video, please slam on that like button. And if you really like it, then subscribe to our channel here. And remember to leave us a comment below, and I'm going to try my hardest to reply to all the comments. Thank you guys so much. This is why I do what I do. Every single week, I come out with content that focuses on success, freedom, and living out your purpose. Thank you guys so much. See you next time.